Hello and thank you for watching. This is STSC back again with LEGO Transformers Rise of the Beasts, Cheetor. Originally I had planned to skip building Cheetor, but recently I had been ordering a lot of medium nougat bricks off of Bricklink so that I could eventually work on a wheeljack, and once I had the pieces and I had built Primal, I caved in and decided to build his cat friend. So here is Cheetor, and he is actually a pretty simplistic build. I more or less followed the studio series here. Like Primal, I really didn't want to build these guys because they had very simple transformations, and while I was able to come up with something a little bit more interesting for Primal, I just couldn't think of a way to make Cheetor transform without seriously overcomplicating it and just making it a pain to transform. So instead I went pretty simplistic, and while it is kind of a boring transformation, I still think he looks pretty good in both modes. The one detail I'm not really happy with is his tail. I've used a whip to represent it, and it's kind of the wrong color. It's a little bit too small, and it's stuck in this curve. I tried a couple different techniques to give him a more accurate tail, but since this just folds up onto his back in robot mode, the larger and more accurate the tail, the bigger the backpack. And in the end, I just couldn't get any of the more accurate tails to fold up in a way that I felt looked any good. So I went with this much more simple and a little less nice tail. I had a bit of trouble designing the cheetah's head. I felt like whatever I came up with looked more like a rat than a cat, and I was pretty limited with what parts I actually had in this color. So I just tried my best to make it look as cat-like as I could, and this was what I settled on. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it decently captures the look of the on-screen design. While I wouldn't call the cheetah mode a statue, it is pretty limited in terms of articulation. The head is only able to look up and down, really. It can kind of look left and right, but it involves unclipping one of these joints, and it's really easy to just have the head fall off like that. Then in the front legs, there isn't really a natural forward joint. There's this joint here, though, which can kind of be used, but it is a little bit awkward looking. But it can be used in tandem with the joint on the paw to give it kind of this look that cats definitely do from time to time. The front leg is also able to swing out a little like this, though I don't think that's the most practical joint. The cheetah's rear legs also don't really have a hip joint. There's this joint here for the robot mode, but I just don't think it looks very good when used on the cat. There's also this joint here, which could maybe be used to swing the leg backwards, but again, I just don't think that looks very natural. But there is an actual proper knee joint here, and a joint at the foot. And of course, the tail is mounted on a little hinge joint. For a size comparison, here we have a minifigure. And here we have him with Primal. I have no clue how big the robotic cheetah and gorilla are supposed to be relative to each other, so I just let Cheetor's size be dictated by how big I wanted his robot mode to be. So I have no clue if this is accurate, but I think it's fine. That's all there is to say about Cheetor's beast mode, so now it's time to transform. And here we have Cheetor in his robot mode. We haven't actually seen a clear image of this mode in any of the trailers yet, so I had to base this off of the Studio Series toy. So hopefully that toy was accurate, and if there are any inaccuracies, I blame it. Taking a closer look at his head, I felt it was very important to capture the crest or the ear-like details on it. But unfortunately, I don't have this clip piece in medium nougat, and honestly, I'm not even sure if it exists. So I had to settle for dark gray. I did add this little medium nougat cheese slope back here to add a little bit more of the color to his head, and I even considered making this bottom plate that color, but I felt it was more important to represent his gray mouth than to add more nougat, so I stuck with this design. Cheetor does end up with, unfortunately, a pretty sizable cat head backpack. It's not very flush, and it kind of just sticks out awkwardly. It's not ideal, but I don't think there's really a easy way to make a cat head like this fit into the torso at this scale without making things look super blocky and awkward, so I decided to just give him a backpack. For size comparison, here we have a minifigure. And here we have him with Optimus Primal. I wasn't really sure how much shorter he's supposed to be than Primal, so I just went with what felt right to me, but it might not be entirely accurate. For articulation, Cheetor's head can look left and right. In the shoulders, there's robot claws, which give him effectively a universal range of outward movement and forward and back. There's also a second outward joint here in the bicep, which was actually the cat leg joint, and can be used to make a slightly more natural look, because otherwise his shoulder is practically hitting his head if you want the arm all the way out, but with this, it can look maybe a little bit more natural. There's also a 90-degree bend at the elbow, a wrist swivel, and a wrist bend. Cheetor has a T-joint in his abdomen, which does allow for a swivel, but isn't really all that useful for a crunch, because typically the transformation joint moves before it, and even if you do use it as a crunch, it really doesn't get any range. His hips can kick in and out as well as forward and backwards. He has a 90-degree knee bend, and also a second knee kind of here from the cat mode, though personally I think it looks kind of weird when it's used in this mode, but it is there and can kind of be used to maybe get sort of a double joint range. Then, last but not least, there is actually a swivel at the foot. For accessories, I've built Cheetor's spears, which can be pegged into his hands and held separately, or if their handles are removed, they can be combined together into one long spear, which can also be pegged into his hand. While I wasn't originally planning on building Cheetor, I have to say I'm happy I did. It was a fun chance to play around with a color I've never really used before, and while he is a simple transformer, I think he looks pretty good in both modes, especially as a companion piece to my Primal. But that's all for now, so I'll see you next time.